Okay, so we were learning Hilchos Tzedaka. I apologize, it's been a little bit disrupted, but we're learning the Halachot of Tzedaka. If you remember, in the first week that we learned, we look at the Psukim, and the Psukim in Dvarim Tesvav indicated that that there was it hinted at least at the idea that there was an order. It spoke about ki if there's amongst you a poor person, from your brothers, from someone who's close by, and so on. And from this we learn the concept of an order of who to prioritize when you're giving tzedakah to, the order of giving tzedakah. So the first priority in tzedakah is to give to your closest family. So if you have family members who are need to receive tzedakah, need to be able to live off tzedakah, they come first. And the closest family members, of the family members one has most responsibility towards, interestingly, are one's parents, ahead actually of even one's own children, in terms of the priority of giving tzedakah. Obviously, one has parental responsibility to one's own children, but if one's children are now independent, the priority would be to give tzedakah to one's parents ahead of one's children, because they are considered the closest in the terms of responsibility of tzedakah. So that's the first priority. The Ramah, by the way, in Shulchan Aruch, says that one should be careful if one needs to support one's parents from tzedakah, to make sure that they don't realize that it's coming from tzedakah money, because obviously that would be a lack of covered for them to realize that you're supporting them from tzedakah money. So even though normally one has to stick to the truth, and one shouldn't be vague or misleading in what one's doing, but when it comes to giving tzedakah money to parents, one shouldn't let them realize that the money is coming from tzedakah. But either way, that's the first priority in tzedakah, in the order of relatives, to give to one's own parents. The second closest responsibility in terms of tzedakah is to one's own children, once they have achieved, once you're no longer responsible for them. Now, in the past, that could even mean fairly young children, because from a relatively young age, it wasn't automatically taken for granted that one would support one's children. Excuse me. Good evening. Nowadays, where there's a legal requirement to support children until they're 16 or perhaps until they're 18, it wouldn't count normatively, it wouldn't count as tzedakah till that age, because it isn't something voluntary that one's doing, but one's supporting one's children because there's an expectation and obligation. But either way, in principle, once one's children become independent, then if they are poor and unable to support themselves, then again that could count as the mitzvah of tzedakah. It's an interesting thing, by the way, that if one is supporting parents, one is even allowed to use all one's tzedakah budget on them. I mean, we're not yet talking about Maaser, the idea of tithing, but when we get to the idea of a tzedakah budget, one's allowed to use all one's tzedakah's budget on one's parents if they are poor. When it comes to any other relative, the halacha says one shouldn't use all one's tzedakah budget in supporting family, in order not to become self-centered. One can use part of one's tzedakah budget, but one has to also make sure one's giving outwards. Otherwise, one sort of just becomes focused on oneself and one's own needs, and it's important to focus outwards and give to others also. So when supporting other relatives, one shouldn't use all one's tzedakah money, but when it comes to supporting one's own parents, if needs be, it's a very sad situation, one can use one's own tzedakah money for them. Siblings come next. So parents, we're talking about the idea of giving to relatives, the order of priority of giving tzedakah. As I said, parents come first, then children, and then siblings. Interestingly, by the way, grandchildren come ahead of siblings. So b'nei bonim harihim kabonim, the children of your children are equivalent to your children, and they are your descendants, and therefore they come ahead. So you've got parents, children, grandchildren, and then siblings. Incidentally, for grandchildren, supporting their grandparents is also a priority, but parents come ahead of grandparents if they're both needy. Obviously, there may be other considerations. For example, if grandparents are needier because they're older or the like, but in principle, if you have two equal needs, then grandchildren would come ahead of parents would come ahead of grandparents because grandparents are more distant relative ultimately than parents. Okay, so just to summarize, the first order of priority in giving tzedakah is to family. Family comes out first. That's your first priority in tzedakah, and the nearer the relative is, the earlier they are in the tzedakah priority. Now, this is even if other people are needier. So if you have two aniyim in front of you, one is a close family member, and the other is not a family member, but the close family member, it has a little bit more than the one who isn't the family member. So the non-family person has a greater need. Obviously, we're not talking about pekuach nefesh, where someone's their life is at risk, but both people are poor. One is poorer than the other. Nonetheless, family would come first. So if you remember, I know it's a while back, but we spoke about the order of priority of needs. We spoke about how food comes ahead of everything else, then clothing, then shelter, and so on. But this whole priority of need is only when they are equivalent, when they're both family or both not family. But if one has a family member who needs, then family members come first, even though it's a lesser need, because we have a responsibility to give to our immediate family ahead of others. So that was that's the order of priority in terms of family members. Once one moves away from family, the next order of priority is geography. And again, we saw that in the language of the Pesukim. The Pesukim again indicate that those who live within your city, B'sharecha, come ahead of those who live outside your city. So Aniyei Ircha, the people of your city, come ahead of the Aniyim of another city. And within the order of the city, your neighbors come ahead of other people in the city. So geography is important. Again, the responsibility of tzedakah is to support those who are near you ahead of those who are further away from you. But in this case, it's only when the needs are equivalent. So if someone further away has a greater need than someone nearby, then you would give to the greater need. In other words, when it comes to family, don't turn a blind eye from your own flesh. Don't turn a blind eye from those who are close to you. So when it comes to your immediate family, even though the need is less, family comes first. But when it comes to geographical considerations, those who live in your city, those who live further afield, that's only when the need is equivalent. However, if the need is more significant for those who are further away, then those who are further away can come ahead. So that's the halacha of geography, that you give those who are closer to you. As I said, neighbors come ahead of even the people who are within the city, and Aniyei Eretz Yisrael come ahead of people from another city. So Eretz Yisrael, again, the Pasuk says, Hashem Artzecha, that's in your land, in which we learn that Eretz Yisrael comes ahead of those who are in elsewhere, but not ahead of those who are within your city. So just to summarize the order, family first, and we spoke about the order of the family. Then we move to priority. The next consideration is who has a greater need once you've dealt with priority with family. And if you have aniyim of equivalent need, then it's first your neighbors, then the rest of the city, then Eretz Yisrael, and then other cities in your in your country. So Aniyei Eretz Yisrael come ahead of those in other cities. So that's in terms of the broad principles. There are other priorities, though, that also take into account. A couple of them just to think about. An Isha, a woman, comes ahead of a man. As is well known, very tragically, people who have to fundraise are vulnerable. There's vulnerabilities in needing to fundraise. You're out there, you're going collecting, you're in a position where people can take advantage of you and the like. And therefore, in order to protect women who are often more vulnerable, unfortunately and tragically, when an Isha, a woman, gets a priority over a man when it comes to tzedakah needs. That's one halacha. A second halacha is Talmud Chacham, someone who is a learned person, gets priority over one who is not a Talmud Chacham. So if you have two people in front of you, one who is a learned person who's capable of teaching Torah, and the other one who isn't, then again, all else being equal, a Talmud Chacham would come ahead. So these are some of the general rules of tzedakah. Now, I should have mentioned maybe when we spoke about personal needs, obviously, above all of this comes pekuach nefesh, saving a life. There is a halacha that you shouldn't stand over the blood. You shouldn't stand over the blood of your fellow. You shouldn't stand idly by if someone is bleeding to death, is being murdered, and therefore the mitzvah of saving life comes ahead of all other requirements. What would be included in saving lives? Pidyon Shvurim, freeing captives. I don't mean captives nowadays in modern day prisons, but in the past, when captivity meant death. Bikkur Cholim needs for providing medical treatment for people. So if there are people who are unable to afford medical treatment, organ transplants, flights to treatment centres, etc., then based upon the responsible decision of doctors, medical needs would seek priority. So those are in terms of some of the needs and the order of priorities. Incidentally, by the way, even though we're talking about the priorities of giving, in terms of priorities of receiving, Chazal speak very strongly about the obligation on people to try and avoid taking tzedakah. So it's not a good thing to have to take tzedakah. If you don't genuinely need, it's wrong to take tzedakah. Chazal say that the midah connected midah, the idea of a punishment that lines up with one's failure, is if one takes tzedakah when one doesn't need it, then God forbid one will end up needing to take tzedakah. That would be the appropriate punishment. Equally, though, Chazal say that if someone, and this is Paskins, by the way, in the Shulchan Aruch, if someone does need to take tzedakah, then they should take. One shouldn't be proud. Obviously, it's difficult sometimes to take because one feels uncomfortable doing this, but nonetheless, this is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. That sometimes people go through tough times and they need to get help from others, and in that case, one should take tzedakah and receive it and accept it, and not feel ashamed about it. We all know that if we were, and this applies, by the way, in all areas of life, I think all of us have situations where we need to ask others for help. And we know that if we were in a position to give help to others, we would do that. We would gladly help them. And therefore, we should accept that they are gladly helping us and accept that. Not to take money when we need it is irresponsible because it leads to our suffering or our family suffering or our own ill health when we need support from others. So Chazal find this balance in which they, on the one hand, say, accept money if you need it, but equally don't put yourself in a position where you need money without that being necessary. Yes?
What if you accept money for something that you just need because, like, for example,
Yes. Yes. So it depends on the situation. So just a number of principles around your question. First of all, accepting a gift is not tzedakah. You're allowed to receive gifts from people. Chazal do comment favorably. Soinu matanos yicher. It's a pasuk that there is a elevated madrega. It's called a midat chasidus, a midat of exceptional piety, not even to take gifts. But that's not a requirement. That's like an unusual quality to try and avoid even getting gifts. Now, not every gift is tzedakah. More than that, I saw once that Soinu matanos yicher doesn't apply to immediate family members, because that your parents want to give you gifts. You know, immediate families want to give gifts, but that's not taking tzedakah. Now, a bursary really depends on the situation. If the bursary ultimately is funded by tzedakah, then one should try and avoid taking it if at all possible. One shouldn't needlessly apply to a bursary if it's coming from kasbei tzedakah, if it's a charitable fund or the like. Now, I should mention that when we consider who is a legitimate recipient for tzedakah, it means anyone who can't live up to what's considered a modest but still okay quality of life within the environment within which they live, and therefore that can differ from society to society. So I think, for example, nowadays in Northwest London, where thank God we have a very nice quality of life, we're very lucky, we're very blessed, I think it would be legitimate if someone could never afford a holiday, for example, to take money to occasionally get a holiday. Now, that doesn't mean you can take tzedakah money to go off on a 6-month tour of the world or to go to safari in South Africa, but to get a modest holiday. I think people now would struggle in the environment within which we live. People would struggle if they could never take holiday, because that's become, one has to look at the setting of how people live and what people have become used to in order to assess what's called anius. So if, for example, someone has enough and they're okay, but paying the full fees for something would put them in a position where they couldn't afford anything else other than the basics, then that would justify taking the tzedakah. Again, maybe there's an extra level of tzedakah not to, but that would be considered relative anius. When we spoke about the priority of the recipients, we said that objective anius, objective poverty, comes ahead of subjective poverty, but even subjective poverty is called poverty of sorts. So if someone has, for example, been very wealthy and fallen from their wealth, it may be very humiliating for them to have to immediately downsize till they have a chance to unravel their affairs and get used to it and so on. And that would be a justified recipient of tzedakah, even though they're living well above the normal standards of life. Obviously, that comes behind someone who doesn't have enough food or doesn't have a shelter, but nonetheless, that's also called aniyah. So Chazal didn't have a black and white picture of what defines aniyut, what defines poverty, but nonetheless, poverty is one shouldn't take it if one isn't in need. Yes, but yeah.
So also I'm going back to this.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that when you give money to parents, they shouldn't know the money comes from Tzedaka.
Yes.
The money from Tzedaka is becoming part of the Maaser. That's what you mean? Or?
Okay, so it's a very good question. When I began this series, I really said that the laws of Tzedaka are a little bit different to the laws of Maaser. Maaser is one sort of Tzedaka. When I said they shouldn't know it's coming from Tzedaka, I meant they shouldn't know it's coming from money that you're set aside for Tzedaka. Now, normally the money you set aside for Tzedaka would be your Maaser money, but there may be other reasons why you set aside money for Tzedaka. Sometimes, for example, someone's going through a difficult patch and they daven to Hashem and they say, if I come out of this, I promise I'll give, £100 to Tzedaka. Or they have an amazing achievement and in gratitude to Hashem, they pledge the money to Tzedaka. So people have a pool of money, account of money, which is Tzedaka money, normally because it's their Maaser money, but it could be other reasons why they've put money into that pool, or they have a charitable funds or something like that. So any of those funds, you can use that money to support parents who are poor. However, they shouldn't know it's coming from that fund.
And the quick question is, if you support a family member, is there a Lahavah of how long you should support them? That might discourage them from changing the situation.
Okay, so it's also a really good question. This is a general question, whether it's a family member or anyone, which is how to give money and ensure that it doesn't become effectively just a crutch that the person's leaning on, that they'll never sort of achieve independence as a result. And unfortunately, there's no good answer to that question. It has to be finely modulated to each case to ensure that the money you're not giving is not a disincentive to them, but on the other hand maintains their needs to live. Right at the beginning again, when we learned the halachos of Tzedaka, we saw from the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim said sometimes someone comes round who one looks at them and thinks like, really? I mean, you could earn your own living. Like, I understand that it's not easy for you, but you're a healthy person. Like, go and get a job. And if you can't get a good job, then get a rubbish job. But go and do something to earn your own living. So the halacha is that if a person is a fake, they've got money, don't give them tzedakah. It's not tzedakah. If they genuinely are poor, even though they're poor because of their lifestyle choices, the fact is now they're poor and they need your help, and therefore you should give some money to tzedakah. You don't have to give them large amounts of money to tzedakah, but you should still give something basic to tzedakah. We saw the Pesukim that there is a law, a prohibition in the Torah. Don't harden your heart, and don't close your fist. So if we see someone suffering, part of our responsibilities as Jewish people is we should always give outwards. We should give to someone, even though we may have questions about why they're making the choices they are that have led to them being in that situation. So you don't have to give a large amount of money to someone who is being silly and living a life which is leading to their own poverty. Now, if, as they are standing in front of you, they are now poor, because even though it's because of silly lifestyle choices, nonetheless, then in that situation, everyone should give something to such a person. So just to answer your question, 2 points. If you suspect when you're giving money, it's disincentivizing them, one should therefore think carefully about how one's giving money. But there's no easy general rule to answer that question. You're right, it's a problem. And the second thing is, if someone is poor, even though it's from foolish decisions that they've made, but now they are poor, one should give something to them, even if it's a relatively small sum of money, because the fact is they're now poor.
Children versus grandparents, what's the
in principle, grandparents come ahead of children, yeah. Because grandparents are like parents, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, I remember from a few weeks ago, I think you said that if it comes up to us tomorrow, then we should find an audience. For example, when I'm going on the tube every morning, almost every day there'll be someone who's coming up to ask students.
Yeah.
If I give every single day, then I don't have enough money for that.
So there's 2 points over here. The first is you don't have an obligation to carry money with you if you don't have money. If you don't normally carry money, the halacha of tzedakah is if you have money on you, you shouldn't turn anyone away. So that's number one. I mean, unfortunately for people who collect, it's become harder because we carry less money with us nowadays. In the old days, no one would go out without having cash on them. Nowadays, a lot of people never handle cash. I mean, they just don't use money anymore. We use cards the whole time. But you're not obligated to give someone money, to take money deliberately with you to give someone. The second point is, it's only if someone comes up to you to ask money. So if someone is just standing there, sitting outside the door of Sainsbury's as you walk past, you do not have to give money to them. It'd be a nice thing to do, but you don't have to. But if you're approached to be asked for money, you shouldn't turn someone away, because we shouldn't be cruel, we shouldn't be heartless if you have money on you. But you can give a very token sum, it can be 5 pence. You know, it doesn't have to be a large sum of money, but we shouldn't turn anyone away who's approached us for money. And the halacha, by the way, is if someone knocks on your door to ask for money and you open, you should give them money. But you don't have to open for them. If you're in the middle of lunch with your family, the Torah is trying to achieve, the halacha is trying to achieve a balance between these things. So you don't have to open for someone, but if you open for someone and they ask you for money, you should give them money. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
Giving them because it's like my mitzvah.
You're not doing it because it's your mitzvah. You're doing it because they're suffering. It's true that 5p doesn't help much, but it helps a little bit. They get from 10 people 5 pence, and then they've got 50 pence, and 50 pence can buy an apple and an orange and something little. The Torah is a balance between recognizing that we have to do our bit to help, but also you can't fix everyone's problems all the time. All chesed has boundaries to it. And especially if it's someone who you have questions about why they're living this lifestyle, and perhaps they could do things differently, then you can end up with a disincentive. So you give a token sum, but at the end of the day, if they go around the tube, up and down the tube, and 10 people on a long tube give 10 pence, so they've got 50 pence. They can buy an apple. They're not going to starve. They'll be able to get something basic. So it's not an attempt to solve everything. It's an attempt to do something. Again, when we look at Hilchos Maaser, we'll see this, that in the same way as Chazal said everyone should give a 10%, they also said people shouldn't give too much, because again, it can be a disincentive. Shema Ye'oni, you'll end up poor, so we'll learn those halachos when we get up to Hilchos Maaser. One isn't meant to give too much money to Tzedaka either, because again, it can just cause your own poverty. So it's a balancing act, yeah. Okay, excuse me. Incidentally, this is not a halachic point of view, but it's mentioned by the Chidah as a sort of Musar idea. The Chidah was Chaim Yitzchak David Azulai, very important Sfadi posek, and the Chidah said that one should try and give tzedakah every day, try and give a token sum of money every day for tzedakah. Again, even if it's only a small sum, just so that one's practicing kindness, that one's engaged in kindness. Practicing kindness is, you're right, I'm giving because of my self-development, but it's something real for the recipient. It's not like a joke for the recipient, but it's still a relatively small sum if that's all one can afford. Okay, and especially as you say, if it's every day on the tube, if you're going to give 50 pence every day, you may not be able to, add up over, over a week it's £2.50, over a month it's £10. That could be part of it, over a year it's £120. It can be a significant part of your income. So no one's saying you have to splash large amounts of money to tzedakah, especially when it's arguably dodgy causes, where it's people that you really don't understand what they're doing. Again, if someone has money and is asking for tzedakah, they're a fake. You don't have to give them that. That's not tzedakah. Someone doesn't have money, even though there are serious questions about why they don't have money and why they've chosen this life. Nonetheless, they don't have money, and therefore one should help. Yes.
Parents versus siblings, or parents versus children. If one has a really wealthy sibling, let's say, and one children, then could you just let the sibling get it?
Yes, that's also a very good question. If there's other people there to support, then and they are able to support, then you can say, fine, that's not my obligation. But that's subject to them actually supporting. If for some reason your wealthy sibling is very selfish and they're not supporting, then you'll have to step in. Yeah. Okay. There are, by the way, just some other times where the minhag is to give tzedakah. In Pesukei Zimra, in weekday davening, you may have noticed that some people give tzedakah at the point where we stand up. Just before Yishtabach, there's a part where we stand up before the Shira, and in that section there's a pasuk that says "V'ha'osha v'ha'kavod milfanecha v'ato Moshe l'kol." Osher, wealth, the kavod and honor, milfanecha comes from before you, comes from you Hashem, and you Hashem v'ato, and you Hashem Moshe l'kol, you rule over everything. And the minhag is at that point to give tzedakah, because we're reminding ourselves that the source of our wealth is from Hashem. In fact, the reason why we stand up at that point in Pesukei Zimra may be because of that pasuk. Because we're going to be doing the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, in honor of the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, we stand up at that point in Pesukei Zimra. So again, if you picture davening, after Ashrei we say the Halachos, after the Halachos we stand up. Excuse me, I'm sorry. One of the reasons we stand up is because of the mitzvah of giving tzedakah at that point of the HaKavod. If one is davening Shema or saying the Amidah, and people approach you for tzedakah, you don't have to at that point give money. You don't have to interrupt your tefillah or your Shema, and it can be a hafsek, and you're not obligated to give them. Does anyone know in halachic terminology what's that called when you're doing one mitzvah? And therefore you're exempt from doing other mitzvahs. So Osu mitzvah, excellent, yeah. Osu mitzvah, potter with a mitzvah. When you're engaged with one mitzvah, you're exempt from other mitzvahs. If you're if it's possible to do both, you should do so. But in the case of Shema or Amidah, you are exempt from giving tzedakah at that point because you're now standing in front of Hashem and you're osik the mitzvah, you're involved with doing another mitzvah, and therefore you're potter with a mitzvah. This doesn't apply, by the way, to Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is al-manas la'asos. The condition of learning is in order to do. One of the significant reasons for learning is in order to do. And therefore, if you're osik in Talmud Torah, and a mitzvah presents itself, like someone going around collecting, you're learning here or something like that, then you would interrupt to give tzedakah. But if you're doing the mitzvah Kriya Shema or Amidah, you don't have to interrupt to give tzedakah. Yeah. Yes. There's a mitzvah halachah to give. Again, we saw this on the psukim that we looked at the beginning. There's a psukim in excuse me. The pasuk says, "Lo sa'amitz." Don't harden your heart. Don't tighten your fist. So yes, there's a halacha not to turn someone away when they ask you specifically for money. Absolutely very important halacha. And this is separate to the halacha maaser. This is not to do maaser. Even if you've got no maaser money to give away, if someone approaches you, a Jew should always give. A person should always give to people who are in need. One should never say no. Again, if you don't have much money, you can give a token to some. You can give 5 pence. It's not helping them massively, but it all adds up. But you should give some money to tzedakah when people ask you. Yeah.
If a parent doesn't agree with their child's choices, like let's say they said they want their child to be 18, choose this career path, that's like not really preserved, you're not really have to family, we're not going to support them. If they're in that position where like, their child needs supporting, but like they told them like, we're not going to do it, they still like have they can give them stuff.
Yes, this is the thing. There's all sorts of people that, if you ask me, they're making silly lifestyle choices, right? I don't understand people. A lot of the people that are going around collecting, you at least wonder why they're making this choice, what's going on with them. But if the person now is poor, there's a mitzvah tzedakah.
Even like with warning, like
correct. Even with warning, the fact is they are now penniless, and therefore they don't have enough, and therefore you need to support them. Now don't forget, they're not going to have a particularly nice life getting tzedakah, right? You don't have to give them a luxury life. You have to give them the basic necessities to live, as I said, subjectively as per the quality of life in that area. So it may be 200 years ago in a shtetl in East Europe or in a little hut in North Africa, all that meant was a roof on the head and basic food. In Northwest London nowadays, it doesn't mean that. The person has to have a home and, as I said, decent level of food and occasional holiday, but it's still very basic. You don't have to give them anything beyond that. But yeah, if there's someone in front of you now who doesn't have money, even though maybe you would wish to question why they chose this life, now that they don't have money, you have to give them some degree of tzedakah. Yes.
So what about live in a bad community, and like they kind of like I don't know, if they're living here or something, living somewhere further out, like parents wasn't child to that not constitute all that stuff on it, like even if that's something family that will constitute the whole.
No, so I said that's supporting one's parents, you can use all your tzedakah for. Any other relative, you shouldn't use all your tzedakah for, because then it's all self-centered. It's not looking outwards. Now, if they're just supporting the money because the child to live there, because they like the idea of the child living there, then that would be a problem. However, if you're supporting someone because you feel this is a Mokum Torah and this is a place where they can live a frum life, then that's a justified need for tzedakah. The reality is, in England today, in London today, outside, significantly outside northwest London, it's much harder to live a from life. So you can't say to someone, go and live in, Leeds or even in Shenley or Adlet or whatever, where it's cheaper to buy property or to rent. Because there's no, you need to live somewhere where there's shuls and shiurim and schools and a critical mass of from people. So that would also be justified as tzedakah. So it's true, it ends up with a very expensive lifestyle, but for whatever reason, for better or for us, that's the nature of the community here in England, and therefore that would be called just tzedakah. Again, I'm not, God forbid, saying that one can't live in these areas and live a very frum life in these areas. It's difficult, and it's legitimate for someone to say, I want to live in an area where it's easier to live a strong life, well, have access to good schools and good shuls and other things. So, yeah. Yes?
I don't know if you mentioned it already, but that's if you
Yeah. So it's a very important question. I would actually recommend giving food because, unfortunately, with a lot of these people, you don't know where the money's going to go, and a lot of times the money will be wasted on drugs and things like that. So again, I don't want to generalize, but the Halachot does demand of one to do due diligence. You have a responsibility to make sure you're distributing your tzedakah wisely and it's going to genuine need. The only exception to that, if you remember from a few weeks ago, is if someone asks for food. Someone asks for food, don't turn them away because maybe there's an immediate need for the food. But anything else was meant to do due diligence. You're meant to check that's a responsible need. And unfortunately, with people sleeping rough, it's very often very hard to know what they're going to spend the money on. So buy them something little. I was in as I'm called, the other day going into a shop and I was going to Sainsbury's and someone outside. So I went in and bought them a banana. So it only cost 40 pence or something. And that way I could give that. I wasn't going to spend £2.50 on a sandwich or something. I didn't have the money for that. But I just gave them something, a piece of fruit, and that's appropriate for them. And I think they were very happy with that. They seemed okay with it. If it's a cold day, you can buy them a hot drink, whatever. But yeah. Sorry, you had your hand up?
I have the exact same
question. Yeah.
I often prefer to buy food rather than to give money away. And then we've spoken a lot about how if a Jewish person came up to ask for help, what is the mitzvahs surrounding non-Jewish people?
One also gives, yeah. We saw Rambam last time that the halacha is that we give gomel chasodim when it comes to gemilas chasodim. We bury non-Jews together with Jews. We feed non-Jewish aniyim together with Jewish aniyim. We do bikur cholim of non-Jews together with bikur cholim of Jews. The areas where there's a difference in halacha between a Jew and a non-Jew is areas that are considered beyond normal moral treatment. So, for example, hashavas aveda. So I have to, someone loses something, I have to take the object into my house, I have to store it, which is a pain in the neck and a hassle. I have to start putting up signs. It's not my problem. If they've lost their object, let them put up the signs. I have to start putting up signs and identifying who it belongs to. That's something that's way beyond any normal societal expectation. That's a special mitzvah. So that applies to a Jew, not to a non-Jew. But the basic level of chesed, we do, says the Rambam, because of Darkei Shalom, meaning to say all humans have to live b'shleimus, have to live in an equitable manner with each other, in a shalom manner with each other. By the way, it's often mistranslated as if this concept means if you don't do it, it will lead to hatred, anti-Semitism. You have to do it to avoid people hating us. That's not what shalom means. Shalom doesn't mean you don't hate someone. Shalom means you can work together with someone in harmony. We're all passengers on the same ship on planet Earth. So we have to be able to live b'shleimus with each other. We have to live with harmony with each other. So that in that respect, the halachos apply to everyone.
What's more important? Because I know there's a whole discussion of whether this is completed, if it's from the heart or if it's done by action. And so, what if someone really wants to be able to give tzedakah, but they're unable to? Would that level would Hashem see that at the same level as someone who has given tzedakah?
So there's a general idea of Tzedaka Maaser, which is a spiritual idea. If you have intention to do a mitzvah, but you're just simply unable to do it, that's considered as if you've done a mitzvah. But then you haven't done the mitzvah. So maybe on a spiritual and intent level, but clearly if you can do a mitzvah, it's better to actually do a mitzvah than just to then do it. But you're correct that there's an idea of Tzedaka Maaser. Okay. I mentioned already Yosef mitzvah potem in a minute. So I mean, this can apply to other scenarios. Sometimes poor people go around weddings collecting money. If you're sitting in a wedding suit or schmoozing to your friends and a poor person approaches you, again, the same idea, there's a mitzvah to give the person. If you're in the middle of dancing and they tap you on the shoulder, you don't have to give them because Osik the mitzvah, bottom in a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah to do some chas and lakana, right? One of the great mitzvahs that we have is to bring joy to a couple who have just got married, mitzvahs, simchat, chatan lakala, the simcha, the joy of the chas and kala. So in that case, you don't have to give the, you don't have to interrupt to do the mitzvah. So each case has to be worked out by itself, but in principle, there's a din of Osik mitzvah, bottom mitzvah. The only exception to that, as I said, is Talmud Torah, because Talmud Torah is Amadas Lazos, when it's a mitzvah veris, when it's a passing mitzvah, and that is needed at this moment in, excuse me, is needed at a moment in time. If it's not a passing mitzvah, because they could easily come back or whatever, then you don't have to interrupt Talmud Torah. But if they couldn't easily come back, then you have to interrupt Talmud Torah because it's a mitzvah overes. That's a general rule in all Talmud Torah. Okay. Excuse me. I just actually want to make a note of one of the questions I was asked. Just I can say it later. Yeah.
Can you just explain what I didn't get it?
Sorry, can I just explain?
What says?
Yes. Okay. Sorry. So I'll give a bit of background. The general rule with most mitzvahs is that osek the mitzvah, patur min mitzvah. If you're busy with the mitzvah, you're exempt from other mitzvahs. The only exception is Talmud Torah, where Torah is almanat lasis. Part of the reason of Torah is to do, one of the reasons for learning Torah is to do mitzvahs. More than that, Talmud Torah is a mitzvah the whole time, and therefore with Talmud Torah we don't say osek mitzvah patur min mitzvah, as long as, or only in a situation where the mitzvah is passing, where there's no, you can't defer the mitzvah to later. So you don't have to interrupt Torah to do a mitzvah, where you can do the mitzvah when you finish learning. So if the Oni is around the whole time, the Oni's hanging around, are going to be there for 3 hours. So why should I give the Oni now, interrupt my Talmud Torah? When I finish learning, then I can give the Oni. However, if the Oni is going around now, the poor person is going around now, after that will be gone, then I should interrupt my Talmud Torah for a few moments and just give tzedaka. So with Talmud Torah, with learning, we don't say osik b'mitzvah, patur min mitzvah. If it's what's called a mitzvah veris, if it's a mitzvah that is passing, and I won't be able to do the mitzvah. I won't be able to do the mitzvah later. I will talk in future weeks. I hope after the next week, after the winter break, we'll switch from the laws of Tzedaka to the laws of Maaser, because Maaser has its own laws. As I mentioned, the tithing halachas are a subsection of Tzedaka. Even if you are exempt from Maaser, and many people are exempt from tithing because they don't have the means to do so, they still have a mitzvah Tzedaka. And the only exception to this is, again, someone who doesn't have enough for themselves, literally would impoverish themselves. It would be, sorry? Tithing, I mean separating, taking maaser, separating a tenth of your income, yeah. So that we'll learn later, that's not what we're yet up to. Here we're talking about every person. In others, not everyone is obligated to tithe, to separate off maaser from their money. They may not be in a situation where they can afford to do so, but everyone is obligated to give tzedakah. How much should you be giving tzedakah? To every person who approaches you. The exception to this is if you don't have money on you or you're poor. If you're so poor that you won't be able to, that any money you give is directly coming out of the mouth of yourself or your children, then you don't have to give that money to tzedakah. Even such a person should give some sum of money to tzedakah. In other words, just to make this clear, no person in Klal Yisrael should be completely self-centered. We should all give some money to tzedakah. That's level number one. So even if we're desperately poor, we should give something to tzedakah, even if it's just a few pence. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two is that if we're not so poor, we should give to anyone who needs, who approaches us, to anyone who actually asks us for money. We shouldn't turn people away cold-heartedly. And halacha number three, which we'll learn in the future, is if we have a steady income, then we should separate off on a consistent basis, maaser, a tenth, in order to give that to tzedakah. So there are many people who are exempt from maaser, they're exempt from giving a tenth, because they're not on a sustainable, steady income. But nonetheless, the halacha of giving to anyone who asks them would still apply. And then there are people who are desperately poor, where even the halacha of giving to anyone who asks them doesn't apply, because they're desperately poor. And for them, the halacha will just be to make sure they sometimes give some things, that they're not living self-centeredly, that they're not giving just focused on themselves, even though what they're giving is a relatively poor, tiny sum of money. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question about, like you said that if anyone would come up to you and ask you for money, then you should give it. Often, like if you're on the train on your way to, like, I'm going to university, I get like maybe 30, like.
Yeah. Yeah, Rosa just asked this before you came in. Yeah.
Yeah. Give to everyone.
So very briefly, you can listen to recordings to hear a more elaborate answer, but just very briefly. Firstly, you don't have to give if you don't have money on you. But if you do have money on you, it can be a tiny sum. It can be 5 pence, but you should give to people who ask. We shouldn't harden our hearts. People are in need. One should give us. By the way, I should mention also sometimes there can be a safety issue, and obviously one needs to watch one's safety. The boys can talk about that. Sometimes, unfortunately, some of the people who are collecting money can be a little bit sinister, can be a little bit scary. Either they really are, or at least our perceptions of them are, and wrongly or rightly. If you feel nervous, again, I mean, you don't have to put yourself at risk to give tzedakah. Certainly for home alone, for example, and someone knocks at the door, you shouldn't open. We have to recognise that there unfortunately there are vulnerabilities around. Yeah. Yeah.
People get people off
yes.
a charity. Does that count as being off by money for tzedakah?
It's a very good question. First of all, not every charity is for aniyim. Yeah, that's important to notice. They're all worthy charities, right? There's no doubt that I don't know, a kiruv organization, or a yeshiva, or a shul, or school. These are all very, very worthy causes. When they're not, then that's not an oni. That's not a poor person approaching you. So there are very few tzedakas that are directly for aniyim. A hospital, maybe gifts or something like that would be. There's not that many tzedakas. Even gifts, you'd have to work out how much of its budget is actually going to poor people. How much is, for example, they do educative programming and tachniyat, very, very, very worthy things in order to train people in chesed. But that's not called an oni approaching you. But if an oni approaches you, or a gabba tzedakah who's therefore the shliach, the agent of a poor person, to collect for you, then that's the same thing. That's someone approaching who's actually collecting to give out this money that you give for aniyim. Then that would count. So, so as important as a building campaign is, or whatever it may be, that's not called. That's not. Yeah.
If, let's say, someone doesn't have to give Maaser and they use Tzedaka, but to other causes it doesn't count, or all time?
No, it's a really good question. Thank you for letting me clarify that. Both Maaser and Tzedaka can go to causes other than poor people. That's all called aniyim. But this particular halacha, that anyone who asks, you have to give something to, if it's genuine, is only for an oni. It's only for a poor person. There's many important tzedakas that are not for poor people, and that's wholly legitimate. Klal Yisrael needs shuls, it needs yeshivas, it needs kiruv organizations, it needs thousands of things. These are all completely worthy tzedakas, and you can use Maaser money for them. However, the particular halacha of don't close your fist, don't harden your heart, that is for the pasuk is explicitly talking about an evian, a poor person, and oni, a poor person. Yeah.
Priority. Should you prioritize giving to poor people over something smaller organization?
Yes, the answer is yes. If you have someone who is needy in front of you, that's the first priority. So someone who doesn't have enough food, enough clothing, shelter over their heads, and so on. These are that's the priority. Yeah.
What happens if
and pikuach nefesh, a hospital or operation. So yes.
A lot of them don't carry coins anymore, so you might
Yes.
carry like bigger notes.
Yeah.
Like what happens if you don't have a smaller notes and someone's asking you for money? If you only have 20 pound notes, like that's quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
Just to give away.
Yeah. So if you can break the note up and they would accept that, then you should do so. If they won't, and it will end up as a whole scene because they'll sort of make a judgment. Oh, if you've got £20 note, why are you giving me 10 pence or 15 pence, whatever? Then you don't have to do it. Yeah. I don't think, by the way, if you have zero money and you've only got a credit card and someone comes around with a credit card machine, I don't think technically that falls within the category of having money on you that you're obligated to give tzedakah. The credit card effectively works you make an arrangement with a credit card company to lend you the money, and they will give the money to the recipient, and after a month you'll pay back to the credit card company. That's how a credit card works. I don't think a credit card would be a chiyuv in tzedakah. Maybe a debit card would be different. I'm not. Is that what you're going to ask about a debit card? No. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what would say about credit. It could be a debit card would count. Yeah.
So about the ani and the organisation. So you said if the ani is in front of you, then
Yes.
like priority. But what if you're seeking out someone's gift and like there's not an ani like that?
Then you're entitled to cut other tzedakahs also. If you have, for example, a pool of tzedakah money, you have a tzedakah fund, or you've got your Maaser money, then the other criteria apply. And yeah, I should tell you, even though the poskim gives, and we will learn that when we look at Maaser, series of priorities and so on, a person also has to have the ability to give to a tzedakah that particularly appeals to them and speaks to them. So that's when there isn't an immediate person in front of you. All I was saying when I said we're talking about a poor person is when there's an immediate person in front of you, that's where there's the priority of giving to that immediate person. But there's not when you're. But all the other things are still the mitzvah of tzedakah. There's tons of important things that the community needs. Hatzalah and CST, and these are all important organizations. But that's not an oni. That's not a poor person in front of you. Yeah. Okay. I just want to finish off. I know we've gone a little over time. Just to finish off. I'll just finish off with two more sets of halachos, then we'll finish for today. Just some of the halachos. Again, I think these things are probably obvious to all of you, but the poskim mention them. When you give money to tzedakah, the Shulchan Aruch says you should give the tzedakah with a pleasant face, with empathy to the suffering of the oni. So you should demonstrate a human compassion and care. So brings the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei and Hilchos Tzedaka. And an additional quality is if you can engage a little bit with a poor person, speak to them. People that are collecting often feel very humiliated, very ashamed, very low. And the Gemara in Bava Basra really speaks very beautifully about if you lift the spirits of the person who's collecting, then that's a better way of giving tzedakah. The Shulchan Aruch carries on and says that if you give money to tzedakah and you do it in a negative way, in a grumpy way, even if you gave a large sum of money generously, you would transgress a lav in the Torah. There's a pasuk in the Torah which says, we saw this talking at the beginning, don't your heart shouldn't be full of evil when you give the money to tzedakah. So if you resent giving the money to tzedakah, I have to give you money. That's losing the mitzvah tzedakah, and that's transgressing a lav in the Torah. So paskins the Shulchan Aruch really based on a pasuk. So it's important that one does it in a good way. Again, just to mention some other things that I'm sure you're familiar with. Matan b'seisa, if at all possible, giving money anonymously is a mila in tzedakah. Excuse me. The ideal form of anonymous is where you don't know who the recipient is and they don't know who the giver is, so double anonymity, or at least one-way anonymity, because both of these reduce embarrassment. Paying someone's debt for them so they just find it paid off can be a situation of tzedakah. There's a halacha that if you have a poor person who you're sure is genuinely poor and needy, you're allowed to use a little bit of trickery to get them the money. So, for example, you can say to them, "I want to invest with you," or "I want to lend you the money," or I've got this is a gift that I'm giving out to lots of people. So you can find a way to encourage them to make it a little bit easier to give the tzedakah. Tzedakah is a mitzvah, and therefore, as long as you can do it in a way that won't embarrass the recipient, it should be done like other mitzvahs. So many mitzvahs we do standing up, unless they're mitzvahs that are deliberately done sitting down, like eating associated mitzvahs. In general, we stand up when we do a mitzvah. If you think about, Tekiyat Shofar and things like that. So shaking the lulav and so on, we stand up when we do a mitzvah. So obviously, if you're going to embarrass the recipient, don't do this. But if you can do it standing up to give cover to the mitzvah, mitzvahs we try and do with our right hands, with our more chashuv hands. When you make a bracha, you hold an apple with your right hand. When you do a mitzvah, you hold with your right hands, and so on. So really, you should do the mitzvah with your right hand to give the money to tzedakah. And we don't make a bracha when we give tzedakah. There's a few reasons why we don't make a bracha when we give tzedakah. One reason given is first to avoid embarrassing the recipient. If when you give the recipient, you say, you're mistreating them. Another reason is the Rashba says because the recipient might refuse in the last minute, and therefore you can't know for sure that they're willing to accept the money. But a third reason is for many mitzvahs of bein odom lahavah, we don't say brachas on it. And the reason is because when it comes to mitzvah bein odom lamakom, me and my relationship to Hashem, I'm doing the mitzvah. At the moment I'm doing it, I'm just doing it to serve Hashem. When it comes to mitzvahs bein odom lahavah, I should feel empathy for the person. I should feel sympathy for the person. I should want to do the act of chesed. Why should I want to do chesed? Because I've made myself into a kind person. Why do I make myself into a kind person? Because that's what Hashem wants from me, yes. But when I'm doing the mitzvah, I'm not just doing it because Hashem's commanded me to do it. I'm doing it because I now care for the person, because I've become a Baal Chesed. And therefore we don't make, one of the reasons we say brachas before we do mitzvahs is that we focus on doing this as with an intention of serving our Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's my motive in doing the mitzvah. When I'm giving to tzedakah, I'm aware that it's a mitzvah, but my motive in doing it at this point is because of care and chesed, because I've molded myself into someone who cares for other people. And therefore, at the moment of doing the bracha, of doing the mitzvah, we don't say a bracha on the mitzvah of tzedakah. Yes.
Lending someone the money, so it doesn't count as stuff like the lender, and this is your equity.
The truth is, there can be cases where lending counts as tzedakah. And when we looked at the psukim of tzedakah again at the beginning, one of the primary psukim was in Kesef Talveh, was the mitzvah of lending. Lending can be a very good form of tzedakah because it can tide people over a difficult time whilst preserving their dignity because they know they can pay back. So it depends on the person. If you have someone who is long-term unable to make ends meet, they'll never, they're in a situation where, I don't know, they're very unwell, they'll never be able to get back on their feet, they're long-term tzedakah, so don't lend the person where you're stressing them out, give them the money, unless they refuse to take it, in which case you can trick them and say, don't worry, it's a loan. But if you have someone who intrinsically, fundamentally is someone who's okay, they've just gone through a rough patch, they've had unexpected expenses, or they've had a short periods of being unwell, or they just lost their job, but they'll get another job, then sometimes the kindest form of tzedakah is to lend them because it preserves their dignity. So it depends on the case, but yes, tzedakah alone could be the highest form of tzedakah because it preserves the person's dignity, or, you know, so an investment that allows them to set up their own business and stand on their own 2 feet. So getting someone to a position where the tzedakah gets them back to their own financial independence, that's the best form of tzedakah. Yeah.
How does it work in terms of saving money for tzedakah? I guess the other person knows that when their parents retire, they'll need to be supported, or when their child gets married, or when a child, they'll need to be supported.
Yeah.
So it's what extent can they save money for the eventuality?
So that's a very good question. If you have a Maaser fund, generally speaking, you can't save that money for too long term. Because if you've got tzedakah money, you've got a tzedakah account sitting with you, it's not fair to keep it. There's people that need it at the moment now. However, in your case over there, who says you're obligated to set aside the money for Maaser? You can set it aside in your account as a saving account, and then one day you'll give it to tzedakah when a particular need that you care more about approaches you. So it depends on the scenario. If you've already got actual tzedakah money sitting in your hands, then you shouldn't be hoarding it because there's people that need it at the moment now. So if someone has a very large tzedakah fund, they can take their time distributing it because it can take time to research and find out what's good causes and make sure they're doing it with due diligence. You can sometimes justify for tzedakah reasons delaying a little bit because maybe there's an investment that will give a good return to the name. You can't just delay it needlessly giving out the money. That's once the money is already set aside for tzedakah. But who says they have to set aside the money for tzedakah? You can save money because you see an expense coming up in the future, and then at the time deal with it. Yeah.
As an investment, it can be the gain or loss.
Yes.
From this investment. One keeps a record of the gains and losses. Like in terms of about long term,
Yeah.
how long can one stretch time over to see if the loss will offset the gains, in which case
So it's a very good question. This is really a kind of question in Maaser when it comes to tithing. So we will deal with it when we deal in Maaser. But the general rule is that you only do the calculation once you've capitalized the investment. In other words, let's say I put money into a property. So the money has gone from cash, liquid money, into money sitting in a property. So I don't anymore have the liquid cash. Now let's say that I spend £100,000 in the house, and every year it goes up £10,000. So next year it's 110, the next year 121, and so on and so forth. So the first year I've made £10,000 profit. I don't have to take Maaser because I don't have the capital. I don't have the cash. It's still invested in the capital investment. After 5 years, I sell the house, and now it's worth £200,000. So now I've made a gain of £100,000. So I will now take the Maaser on the £100,000. But again, we'll deal with that when we learn Halachos and Maaser. But in general, an investment that's not liquid, I don't have to liquidize it in order to pay Maaser money. I don't do the calculation till it's become liquid cash again back in my pocket. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop there, and Mitzvah Hashem will continue next week. We'll then take a break for the winter. I hope next week to finish the halachas of Tzedaka, and then after the winter we'll start the halachas of Maaser, the tithing calculations, which are their own halachas. Okay, thank you so much to all of you for joining. Thank you. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you very much. Good Shabbos.